They call him the philosopher who said life has no meaning but chose to live anyway. The man who watched half of Europe collapse and said the only question worth asking is whether to kill yourself. But here's what nobody tells you about Albert Camus. There was a moment, a precise window, 24 hours, when a 26-year-old with blood in his lungs sat in a rented room and decided that meaninglessness wasn't the end. It was the beginning. You want to know what goes through a mind that stares into the void and doesn't blink? Grab a seat. This gets dark before it gets clear. The mother, Catherine Hélène Santès, is deaf, cannot read, cannot write. She moves with Albert and his older brother Lucien to the Belcourt section of Algiers, a working-class district where poverty isn't a condition, it's the air you breathe. No books in the house, no father to remember, just silence and survival and the Mediterranean sun burning through everything. This kid can think, can read, can write sentences that land. Germain pushes him toward a lycée, a prestigious high school near Algiers. Camus gets the scholarship. He's reading Gide, Proust, Verlaine Bergson by the time he's 15, learning Latin, learning English, playing goalkeeper for a local football club because his body still works and he loves the way a ball never comes from where you expect it. He'll say later that football taught him everything about life. You play straight or you don't. No middle ground. In Algeria, in 1930, tuberculosis kills 140 out of every 100,000 people. For a kid in Belcourt, it's a death sentence with a variable timeline. The disease carries shame. Middle-class families whisper about suspicious coughs. They say it's a moral weakness, a sign of bad character, uncontrolled desires, self-destruction baked into your cells, a threat to his own family. He moves in with his uncle Accault, who runs a butcher shop. The uncle is an anarchist with a library full of French classics, Algerian literature, Mediterranean culture, gives Camus raw meat and fresh blood, a luxury, gives him a room of his own for the first time in his life. Semi-quarantined but stocked with ideas. Because Camus' father died serving France, the boy qualifies for free medical treatment. Without that, he'd already be dead. The tuberculosis changes everything. No more football, no more university career track. He has to study part-time, work odd jobs, private tutoring, wine barrel factories during holidays with his uncles and brother. Every plan now has an asterisk, if the lungs hold. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, updated October 27, 2011, the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, multiple peer-reviewed biographical studies, including research published in Public Things on September 20th, 2021, titled On the Influence of Tuberculosis on Camus' Early Life and Work, 1931 to 1941, and PMC's Psychobiographical Study from April 7th, 2021. These aren't general sources. They're archival dives that trace the exact medical records, the university enrollment dates, the moment-by-moment progression of a man whose disease shaped his philosophy. Now back to the information. His mentor is Jean Grenier, a teacher who introduces him to Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, ancient Greek philosophy, the Bible, Eastern religion. Grenier publishes a collection of lyrical essays called Les Îles in 1934. Camus reads it and decides right then, I want to write. He absorbs Grenier's worldview. The teacher writes that humanity finds escape from daily work through illness, that disease for a poor man equals a journey, that life in a hospital mirrors life in a palace. It's tongue-in-cheek, but Camus latches onto it. Tuberculosis becomes his fortunate illness, not because it's good, because it forces him to think about death every single day. He discovers Antonin Artaud's essay, The Theatre and the Plague, in Nouvelle Revue Française in 1934. Artaud mixes medicine and literature. Camus sees possibility. His own lungs are collapsing, but his mind is expanding. He joins the Algerian branch of the French Communist Party in 1935. Stays briefly. Too much fanaticism. He starts a theater company, writes, acts, directs, avant-garde plays, political plays. All while his body demands he slow down, cancel trips, say no to life. Another tuberculosis attack shuts it down. He goes to a resort in the French Alps to recover, first time in Europe. Travels back through Florence, Pisa, Genoa, sees art, sees history, returns to Algiers with lungs that still betray him but a mind that won't quit. Second collection, Gnosis. In English, Nuptials. More sophisticated handling of absurd experience, sensuous vitality, love of the sun, love of the coastline, the tension between joy and death. He's also working as a journalist now. October 1938 to January 1940, he writes for Alger Républicain, a leftist newspaper founded by Pascal Pia. Camus has strong anti-fascist feelings. Europe is crawling with fascist regimes. He witnesses harsh treatment of Arabs and Berbers by French authorities in Algeria. develops strong opposition to authoritarian colonialism, writes about it. The paper gets censored, gets banned in 1940. He's almost completed what he'll later call his first cycle of works dealing with the absurd and the meaningless, a novel called L'étranger, in English, The Stranger, a philosophical essay called Le Mythe de Sisyphe, in English, The Myth of Sisyphus, and a play, Caligula. Each cycle, novel, essay, play, he's building a system without calling it a system. The occupation begins. He marries Francine Faure, a pianist and mathematician, on December 3rd, 1940. They move to Lyon, then back to Algeria, to Oran, where he teaches part-time French history, geography, primary schools. His tuberculosis flares again. Doctors tell him to spend the winter at higher altitude. He's coughing blood. Both lungs now. The prognosis is dire. In January 1942, in Algeria, his second lung gets infected. Until now, he's refused a sanatorium. Now he has no choice. August 1942. He's stable enough to travel. Francine finishes her school term. They get a travel pass on medical grounds. They go to Le Panelier in mainland France. He travels to Saint-Étienne every 2 weeks for pneumothorax injections. Needles into the chest to collapse part of the lung so the infected tissue can rest. Then back to Le Panelier to recover until the next injection. Francine returns to Algeria for work. Camus is alone in a mountain village, trapped by disease and by war. The Stranger, about a man who shoots an Arab on a beach for no clear reason and gets executed less for murder than for failing to perform grief correctly. And the myth of Sisyphus, which opens with the line, "There is only one really serious philosophical question, and that is suicide." The fall of France isn't abstract for him, it's the backdrop. Millions displaced, values shattered. The rational world proving it was never rational. Camus sits in that rented room with tuberculosis eating his lungs and writes that the absurd is born from the confrontation between the human need for meaning and the unreasonable silence of the world. He starts from methodical doubt, presumes skepticism, strips everything back. The mind wants order. The mind wants meaning. The mind wants the universe to make sense. But the universe doesn't answer, doesn't care, doesn't even acknowledge the question. That gap, that divorce between what we need and what we get, that's the absurd. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Rising, streetcar. 4 hours in the office or factory meal, streetcar. 4 hours of work. Meal, sleep. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, same rhythm. Most of the time you follow it without thinking. But one day the why arises, weariness tinged with amazement. Why am I doing this? What's the point? And in that moment, the stage sets collapse. You see the mechanical nature of your existence. You see that you're Sisyphus, pushing a rock up a mountain only to watch it roll back down. Forever. Finding false hope in what impoverishes you. He rejects it. He's not interested in escaping the absurd. He's interested in living inside it without lying to himself. You realize nothing you're building will last. Your work is futile. Your relationships will end. You will die. Everyone you love will die. The universe will forget you faster than you can imagine. And yet, most people don't kill themselves. Why? The absurd only exists in the meeting between human consciousness and the irrational world. If you kill yourself, you destroy one side of the equation. You eliminate the tension. But the tension is the point. The absurd isn't something to solve. It's something to live, to face, to scorn. He's retelling the Greek myth. Sisyphus defied the gods, put death in chains so no human had to die. When death was freed and came for Sisyphus, he tricked his way out of the underworld. The gods captured him again, decided his punishment would last forever. He'd push a rock up a mountain. At the top, it would roll back down, and he'd start over. Forever. Camus looks at this myth and sees modern life. The workman today works every day at the same tasks. This fate is no less absurd. But it's only tragic at the rare moments when it becomes conscious. His face toils so close to stones, it's already stone itself. He's going back down with a heavy yet measured step toward the torment he'll never escape. This is when the hero becomes conscious of his wretched condition. This is when he sees the full extent of his fate. No hope, no escape, just the eternal repetition of meaningless labor. Because in that consciousness and that full awareness, Sisyphus is free. There is no fate that cannot be surmounted by scorn. When Sisyphus acknowledges the futility of his task and the certainty of his fate, he's free to realize the absurdity of his situation and reach a state of contented acceptance. He's not hoping for rescue. He's not praying for meaning. He's not pretending the rock will stay at the top. He knows exactly what his existence is. And in that knowledge, he's stronger than the gods who punished him. The rock is his thing. His fate belongs to him. He owns it. And Camus concludes with a line that lands like a hammer. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Sisyphus doesn't resign. He marches down after the rock. He does it again, and again, and again, each time fully conscious, each time choosing to continue. That's the absurd hero. That's the man who looks at meaninglessness and says, fine, I'll live anyway. He has every rational reason to give up, and instead he writes that the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. That even in a universe without a master, even in a world that seems sterile and futile, each atom of the stone, each mineral flake of the night-filled mountain forms a world. The climb matters not because it leads anywhere, but because it's the act of climbing. The life matters not because it has inherent meaning, but because it's the act of living. In the preface Camus writes in Paris in 1955, he looks back and says this book declares that even within the limits of nihilism, it's possible to proceed beyond nihilism. Written 15 years ago, in 1940, amid the French and European disaster, this text affirms that a path exists, not an escape, not a solution, but a way to live without lying. It's not like he wakes up one morning and decides to embrace the absurd. It's a process. It's thousands of small confrontations with meaninglessness, every cough that brings blood, every canceled plan, every friend who dies in the war, every day the occupation continues, every moment his body reminds him he's dying. And through all of it, he's building the argument, piece by piece, word by word, that the absurd isn't a reason to quit. It's a reason to continue with eyes open. He's not theorizing about death from a comfortable distance. He's living with death in his chest, feeling it, tasting it. Every breath a reminder that time is finite and the universe doesn't care. It made the abstract concrete, made the philosophical visceral. When he writes about Sisyphus pushing the rock, he's writing about his own lungs pushing air. When he writes about the futility of repetitive labor, he's writing about the daily pneumothorax injections, the needle in the chest, the temporary relief, the inevitable return of symptoms, the cycle that never ends. It's a metaphor for the threshold, the moment when you stop asking why and start asking how. How do I live knowing there's no ultimate answer? How do I continue when the universe offers no justification? How do I find joy in a world stripped of inherent meaning? Camus crosses that threshold in the winter of 1940-1941, alone in Le Panelier, writing by lamplight, coughing blood into rags, watching the war news trickle in, knowing France has fallen, knowing his mother is trapped in occupied Algeria, knowing his wife is working to survive, knowing his lungs are failing. And if he's going to die anyway, which he knows he will, then he'll die fully conscious, fully aware, fully engaged in the act of living, no illusions, no false comfort, just the raw fact of existence and the choice to affirm it. The essay opens with suicide as the serious philosophical problem, but Camus isn't advocating it, he's refuting it. He's saying that even if you accept that life is meaningless, suicide is not legitimate, because suicide eliminates the absurd. And the absurd is where meaning is made, not found, made by you, in the act of living despite knowing. Revolt, you must not accept any easy answer or reconciliation. You keep struggling, you keep questioning, you don't give in to comfortable lies. Freedom, you're absolutely free to think and behave as you choose. No cosmic law, no divine plan, no predetermined fate, just your choices and their consequences. Passion, you must pursue life with maximum intensity, not because it leads to something, because it is something. Each moment matters, because it's fleeting. Each experience matters because you're conscious of it. You live in revolt, you live in freedom, you live in passion, you make your rock your own. Becomes editor-in-chief of Combat, an underground newspaper. He's writing, he's fighting. He's living the absurd life he theorized. And he's still sick, the tuberculosis never leaves. Recurrent bouts for the rest of his life. But he's accepted it. It's part of his rock, part of what he pushes up the mountain. But really, it's about the Nazi occupation, about resistance, about communal revolt. The plague in the novel is described exactly like tuberculosis. Fevers, morbid swellings, coughing blood, death. Same symptoms Camus has manifested since 17. Same age as one of the novel's characters when he first caught the disease. The structuring theme is separation, people trapped by quarantine, unable to reach loved ones. It mirrors Camus' own separation when he was exiled from his family home, when he was isolated in France during the occupation. He's writing tuberculosis writ large, a liberating plague, a disease that forces people to choose how they'll respond to meaninglessness. An absurdist experience, suffering is individual, but from the moment rebellion begins, suffering is seen as collective experience. The first progressive step for a mind overwhelmed by the strangeness of things is to realize this feeling is shared, that human reality in its entirety suffers from the distance between it and the universe. This evidence lures the individual from solitude. It founds its first value on the whole human race. I rebel, therefore we exist. Just the fact that we're all in this together, that we all suffer, that we all struggle. And that struggle, that shared rebellion against meaninglessness, creates solidarity, creates value, creates meaning even in a meaningless universe. The friendship shatters. Camus is devastated, isolated, but he keeps writing, keeps thinking, keeps living the absurd life. His acceptance speech is dedicated to Louis Germain, the teacher who saw potential in an 11-year-old boy from Belcourt and gave him a shot at education. Camus never forgets where he came from, never forgets the poverty, never forgets that everything he built was built on luck and effort and the kindness of a few people who believed in him. A monologue by a former lawyer who can no longer judge others without seeing his own hypocrisy. It's darker than his earlier work, more introspective, more personal. The tuberculosis is worsening. The Algerian War is tearing his homeland apart. He wants reconciliation between the native Muslim population and the French Pied Noir minority. But both sides reject him. The Muslims see him as a colonizer. The French see him as a traitor. He's caught in the middle of an absurd conflict with no good answer. Maybe driver error, maybe just randomness. Camus dies on impact, age 46. Not from tuberculosis, from absurdity. A futile, senseless accident that even he wouldn't have been surprised by. In his pocket, a train ticket. He'd planned to take the train, but changed his mind at the last minute. About his father he never knew. About poverty and sunlight and the Mediterranean. It gets published posthumously in 1994. Unfinished, but powerful. A return to his roots. To the sensuous vitality he wrote about in his earliest essays. To the love of life that sustained him through disease and war and philosophical crisis. He accepted it because he had no choice. The tuberculosis took that choice away. Death wasn't theoretical, it was in his chest. The fall of France took that choice away. Meaninglessness wasn't academic, it was the occupation. The poverty of his childhood took that choice away. Suffering wasn't abstract, it was his mother's deafness, his father's absence, the hunger in Belcourt. He accepted the absurd because he was living it every day. Every breath, every cough that brought blood. And he pushed it up again, not because it would stay at the top, because the struggle itself was enough. Because the act of continuing, of living with eyes open, of refusing to lie to himself or others, was the only response to absurdity that retained dignity. Every line he wrote and crossed out and wrote again. It's the accumulation of small acceptances, small revolts, small decisions to continue. And somewhere in that accumulation, the shift happens. Not a conversion, not an epiphany. Just a quiet recognition that the absurd isn't the enemy, it's the condition. And the only way through is forward, with scorn, with passion, with absolute freedom. In 1955, in the preface to the English translation, Camus writes that even if one does not believe in God, suicide is not legitimate. That within the limits of nihilism, you can proceed beyond nihilism. That the myth of Sisyphus is a lucid invitation to live and to create in the very midst of the desert. These aren't empty words, they're testimony from a man who lived in that desert, who created in that desert, who found water in the driest place by refusing to pretend it wasn't dry. From studies published in peer-reviewed journals that map the exact relationship between his disease and his ideas. This isn't a story about a philosopher who had a nice thought. It's a story about a man with blood in his lungs who decided that meaninglessness wasn't a reason to stop. It was a reason to start. He's talking to everyone who has ever felt the weight of absurdity. Everyone who has ever asked why and gotten silence. Everyone who has ever pushed their rock and watched it roll back. Everyone who has ever faced mortality and wondered if there's any point to continuing. He's saying there is no cosmic point, but there's a human point. And the human point is this. You're conscious, you're alive, you're free. And in that freedom, you can choose to affirm existence even when existence refuses to affirm you back. The rock will always roll back down, but you don't have to surrender. You can revolt, you can laugh at the gods, you can make the rock your own, you can walk down that mountain with your head up, and you can push the rock up again, not in hope, in defiance. He figured out that the absurd isn't something to solve or escape or transcend. It's something to embrace, to live fully, to use as fuel for passion and freedom and creative work. He figured out that Sisyphus can be happy, not despite his punishment, because of it. Because in accepting his fate fully and consciously, Sisyphus gains the only victory available, the victory of awareness, of refusal to be crushed. Of continuing, because continuing is the only response that respects both the truth of meaninglessness and the value of being alive. Every person who pushes their rock knowing it will roll back. They're all Sisyphus. They're all in that moment of acceptance, that 24-hour window that stretches across a lifetime. The moment when you stop asking why life has no meaning and start asking how you'll live anyway. The myth of Sisyphus is the foundation. The rebel is the expansion. The plague is the application. His novels and plays and essays for the next 18 years are all explorations of that same question. How do you live in a meaningless universe without betraying your humanity? How do you revolt without becoming a tyrant? How do you create without claiming false transcendence? How do you love without demanding cosmic validation? How do you die without regretting that you lived? By teaching, by creating theater, by returning again and again to Algeria in his imagination, even when he couldn't return in body, by pushing his rock. That it doesn't care about your plans or your talent or your unfinished work. The train ticket in his pocket is perfect. He'd planned to take the train, changed his mind, got in the car instead. One choice, one moment, one difference, and everything changes. Or nothing changes. Because whether he died that day or years later from tuberculosis, the result is the same. The rock rolls back, the mountain remains, and someone else picks up where he left off. A way of being happy, truly happy, while pushing a rock up a mountain you know you'll never reach the top of, because the struggle itself is the point. The consciousness itself is the victory. The acceptance itself is the freedom. It was a sick man in a mountain village writing by lamplight and realizing that the universe's silence wasn't a problem to solve. It was a fact to accept. And once you accept it, once you really accept it, the question changes. Not whether to live, how to live, not whether life has meaning, how to make meaning, not whether the struggle matters, how to make the struggle yours. And in that shift, that pivot, that moment of acceptance, Camus found what he'd been looking for. Not an answer, an attitude, not a solution, a stance, not happiness, revolt. And in revolt, in that absolute refusal to submit to meaninglessness, even while acknowledging it, he found the only happiness available. The happiness of Sisyphus. The happiness of someone who knows the rock will roll back but pushes it anyway. Not in hope, not in faith, not in denial, in full consciousness, in absolute freedom, in passionate engagement with a universe that doesn't care. That's the acceptance. That's the absurd. That's the man. That's the moment. That's the truth.